Cool. So I guess welcome back. Welcome to the Waterford Writers Weekend. My name is Sophie White, and I have the pleasure of being in conversation with Deirdre Sullivan. Woo, welcome. I love how when we're being literary, we're never having a conversation. We are in a conversation. We are in conversation now. So firstly, massive congratulations to you, Deirdre, on the publish of your 9th book this week, which is the book Precious Catastrophe, that is a follow-up to the award-winning Perfectly Preventable Deaths. And I walked into Dubray today, and I just would like to let you know it's just like prime location, bang in front of the door, propped up. It's looking gorge and dying to read it and return to the story of Madeline and her sister, and that began in Perfectly Preventable Deaths. And we're also here to talk about your 8th book. So your 8th and 9th books came out this year, this cursed year of pandemic part 2, 2021. And so your 8th book is your first, I suppose, collection of short stories. It is your first kind of, I guess, adult offering. It's literary fiction, and it is the incredible I Want to Know That I Will Be Okay. And we're going to be okay, aren't we? Like, I think it really speaks to this moment. When I heard the title, I was like, oh, that's good. That's perfect. So, I mean, I'm going to do that embarrassing thing where you have to sit patiently there while I list things about you. So bear with. So, Deirdre, you're from Galway. You have written a staggering amount of work in your career. You have had enormous success with your Prim Perfect series, that is the Primrose Leary series of novels for younger readers. You have been shortlisted for the Children's Books Ireland Awards. You were shortlisted for the European Prize for Literature, and you were the only YA novel to be nominated for this award in any European country. Did you know that about yourself?
Yeah, I did. I was very proud.
Well, it is enormous. I mean, it is so wonderful. Like, and I think like discussing like this kind of like really like broad-reaching, wide-ranging kind of like work that you've produced and created is probably a good place to start for us with this conversation, because I suppose you have been kind of known primarily as a sort of a YA author. And now then you are obviously now producing work for the adult reader. I think YA is really popular with adults, especially your books like Savage Her Reply, Tangleweed and Brine, Needlework. They all deal with like really like, you know, rich topics that are not the preserve of like children or, you know, teenagers remotely. They are topics that speak to all of us. So I guess I wanted to ask you, when you are working on a book, do you feel its place in terms of, does this sit in YA for me, or do I know that I'm kind of reaching for a sort of a literary reader? Do you delineate the work as you're making it, or does that not come into it?
That's a really interesting question. It does and doesn't. I would consider myself a YA writer, and my voice tends towards those, like those are the stories that I am excited to tell. Like, I kind of do gravitate towards first person adolescent characters. I think it's a time when you're on the threshold between childhood and adulthood, and I think that's really rich and allows you to kind of have one foot in either place and to see both in interesting ways. And that, like, I also enjoy that, like, that sense of hope kind of as you form yourself. With I Want to Know That I Will Be Okay, it was kind of a patchwork quilt of a book in a way, because I write, when I get stuck on a project, I write something else for fun or just for escape or whatever. So I kind of would have written a lot of my short fiction, like some of the stories in this are like 8 years old, like just tipping away between books kind of as an escape or as a break. or, you know, kind of if I had an idea in my head, like say with the story about Pebbles, like I was kind of really interested in Jeff the mongoose. He was like this poltergeist that haunted a girl on the Isle of Man, like in the 40s, I want to say. But I was really just interested in him and in imaginary friends and stuff. So I kind of had, you know, you just had something to worry out, but it wasn't like a novel length. So kind of, yeah, I suppose I like first and foremost I write for me, but if I did have a reader in mind, I think the reader I gravitate towards is a young adult.
Or maybe a kind of a younger version of yourself in some ways.
Yeah, maybe.
Like,
I don't know if I would have liked my books though.
Really? But I love that. I think it's like something that you are so good at is kind of that sort of like, I suppose, like the kind of humor and the kind of magic that all kind of coexist in your book, so that they never feel like they're taking themselves too seriously. They don't, you know, it's like always a very kind of relatable world, even though you're often dealing with kind of, you know, the bizarre or uncanny or like magic or, you know, so I think I like that very much as a kind of just reader, I suppose, with kind of books that we kind of might have come up reading, you know, it was kind of either very fantasy, you know, or else it was kind of Judy Blume. And I feel like some of your work sits really nicely in the middle there, you know, where like you've got kind of like, you know, young teenagers with actual kind of powers and magic, but kind of grappling with very sort of like teenage things at the same time, which is quite like enjoyable. Like I quite like that line about how Madeline's discovering that like magic is not just, it's more than just mindfulness and hats. Okay, so I am very interested in what you mentioned there about how if you get stuck with something, you pick something else up. I think that's really unique and amazing. Like it just, I'm jealous. I'm very jealous of that. But it also kind of speaks to, I don't know, like this maybe sense that you still play when you're writing, which is so cool and so important. And I've read somewhere, some, you know, places about your kind of process being very meticulous. And I was really, really impressed with the Perfectly Preventable Deaths being 7 years in progress and 18 drafts long. And I just was like, this kind of care and like kind of forensic attention is so amazing. And it comes through in the work. And I kind of, you know, I feel like it's really worth mentioning that you know, have this whole other life too. You have a career working with children. And I think like, well, I hope, I don't know if I speak for everyone, but I'm very curious about how a writer's life is shaped. And I would love to ask you a little bit about that. And, you know, how you kind of manage your days and manage your years. And
yeah, it's one that's kind of shifted a little bit for me recently, Sophie. I'm quite lucky in that I've taken a career break this year, so I'm kind of focusing on writing, but equally I'm a new mum, so I'm trying to balance motherhood with that as well. And that's a journey. I think I was quite like, I used to say really glibly, kind of when people ask me how I found the time for writing, I've no kids. And I'm realizing that was really true. But with the teaching, I used to be kind of very yeah, I suppose meticulous or very structured. Like, I mean, when you're an autism teacher, like I work with autistic children and young adults, like you do like kind of, you learn to be more of your word, you learn to structure your day, and you learn the value of a timer. And I like literally would sit down sometimes with a timer set for like 15 or 20 minutes and do 20 minutes of editing after a day of work. And when it beeped, I could stop or I could keep going. You know, like I would manage myself to that degree. But like writing as well, it is playful for me and it is healing for me. And I went a couple of weeks without writing anything recently, and like I have kind of 3 things that I do to stay centered, and it's like knitting, writing and yoga.
Yeah.
And I kind of realized that like I hadn't done any of those three things in a week or two, and I was actually like, I was feeling it, you know.
Yeah.
So I've kind of made it like a priority now to kind of get back and to root around in my Word document kind of like once or twice a day, you know. And you can carve time. It's hard, but you can, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, that's funny because one of our first interactions was through knitting. And you gave me, or you directed me towards a pattern. And that was a very good beginner's project because I was beginning, and I was wearing it only today. And I don't know, I encountered this woman and she's like, "Did you make that?" And I was like, "Yes." And then in my mind, I was like, "Oh," and I actually get to finally properly meet the woman who gave me this cardigan. It's like a blanket cardigan. You have one in green, I think. Is yours green?
Yeah, I do. I actually had to, it got full of holes, so I had to unravel it. But I kind of want to knit it again because it's a very soothing one.
It's a very soothing one. It's like wearing a blanket. I went for navy and lilac in my one. And do you ever combine, like, because that's quite interesting, like in needlework, for example, there's so much about kind of craft and art, and like, you know, the protagonist in needlework, you know, is really, well, just obsessed with tattooing. And I'm intrigued, do you ever combine your kind of crafting with your writing? Like,
yeah, I haven't done. I think you wrote about it in Corpsing, and I can't remember exactly I nodded an awful lot reading your book. I loved it. But like, it was about how there are some knitters who are about product and there are some knitters who are about process. And I think kind of like, however meticulous or however careful I am with my prose, like with knitting, I literally just want to do a repetitive thing over and over again until I feel better.
Yeah. Just to still the brain.
Yes.
And when you're kind of daydreaming about your characters and your worlds, do you have things that you find you do that kind of help bring on those kinds of those thought patterns that'll like kind of lead you to a book or an idea?
Well, at the moment, I'm kind of researching and starting to write a project. So I'll have podcasts or different things around that particular topic I'm researching, and I fill a notebook. But it's not like some people have really detailed research notebooks, you know, where they can, like, I don't know, quote like Baudelaire and things. But I kind of will write down beautiful phrases that I come across. So kind of like today, like unannounced, deduction, careless talk, like it's like word salad. But it all comes together in my head when I'm kind of like, because what I'm not really looking for facts, I'm looking for images and I'm looking for feelings. Do you know, if that makes sense?
Yes, it absolutely does. Because I think that's something in your work that helps it be so visceral, so tactile and vivid, is the way you like really occupy your characters. Like it feels like you pull them on, like they're skin suits for you. And I was quite interested in the characters in I Want to Know That I Will Be Okay. I love that these stories are so sort of like just like slices of perfection in and of themselves, and then you kind of leave it to us to kind of find the overarching kind of the thing that, you know, that kind of that wends through it. And for me, I really felt like all these characters feel kind of like Bockety, and one of the stories is the Bockety woman. I love this story. And the thing about actually talking about this book is that I have to be really careful, because I think I could be in danger of spoiling the fun of every one of these stories, because they all have these wonderful, like absurd, you know, dimensions. And I mean, a good example, I suppose, is the opening story of the mother, the couple discussing kind of the, you know, will we, won't we children question. And it kind of opens with a sort of, I think, like side eye to the absurdity of the tests that we set for women kind of socially. I mean, it is, you know, she kind of is describing all her friends getting married as a kind of a job lot 1 year. They just all did it, got married, and then, you know, she lagged and was then kind of already failing the test kind of thing. And I loved then basically this kind of line here where she says, you know, after she has gotten married, I'm there now, Leisha thought, where people are, I'm there. And I feel like that is the kind of unifying thing in the book, these kind of Buckety people trying to fit. And so I guess, is that something that is in your mind? Is that sort of something that you brought to the page on a very conscious level? Or, you know, how does those kind of themes emerge, do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. It's something like I kind of write to answer questions that I have about the world a lot of the time, or to take an idea for a walk. And a lot of the time I don't actually come up with like an answer that I'm satisfied with, but I've thought a lot about it. But I think kind of there is, my mum has disability. So growing up, I thought of this as an adult, like it didn't like kind of really strike me as a child, but a lot of the stuff about kind of maintenance, like makeup, you know, because she can't touch her face.
Okay.
It's just mobility. So say that wouldn't have been something that she did every day, or kind of maybe like 2 or 3 times a year for a wedding or something. And so I think that I grew up kind of being surprised by a lot of, you know, like, or like shaving your legs, you know, like a lot of the things that are taken for granted as just stuff that women have to do kind of like surprised and shocked me, you know, a little bit.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. And the hair management, women's hair management comes into a story in this book that is absolutely brilliant story. I just adore it. Again, like, I do love the way this book really grapples with kind of like living in a body, and how kind of like wondrous and disgusting that is at once. Do you think about kind of disgusting the reader? Do you revel in it?
Like I kind of, yeah, I do. I kind of not necessarily for the reader, but I like looking at bodies and how gross they are, and like all the ways in which they like ooze and need to be, you know, like there's like and I think as well, like, if you know, like you are reminded time and time again as a woman if your body doesn't fit, you know, in different ways, like kind of talking about leg hair. Like I remember when I was 12, like that's like the day I found out I had leg hair. I was wearing a dress that I felt really, really nice in, and an older cousin looked me up and down and was like, "Oh, your legs are really hairy, you should get a wax."
Wow.
Older male cousin. And you know, kind of, and I looked down and literally it was like the hair appeared.
Yeah.
You know, because just before it had
just not registered.
This is it. And all of a sudden it was all I could think about. And like there are a lot of those moments where I suppose you see your own body, or you see bodies through a slightly different lens, or through a slightly more clinical lens, and you know, kind of, or you can be dispassionate about it. And like I do enjoy, I suppose, the surprise and the horror in that.
I liked that in the story that kind of does talk about body hair, like there is a kind of a mention of an ingrown hair that just like immediately I was like, oh, I'm in, because if I find an ingrown hair, it's just jackpot. I'm so excited. I know I've got nice activity for myself for like 10 to 15 minutes. And I think a lot of people are like that. But I really liked in that book the way like the character produced something that is, you know, that you would be told by your older male cousin to get a wax. And she kind of, you know, produces it and teases it out and loves it. Like, I love this line, isn't it awful? Isn't it amazing? I hate it and I love it and it's mine.
Yeah.
And it's her just, it feels like an amazing rebellion. It feels like her reveling, you know, in this thing that we're told, we're socialized to be disgusted by, you know. And do you feel that, like, again, is that something kind of conscious that you kind of, I mean, would you ever begin from a point of like, we are fed this message, I would like to subvert it, here's how I'm going to do that? Or do you really begin with kind of the imagery and the kind of the feel of the person that you want to write about?
Yeah, it's the second one. It's, it's like my research notes. It's like it's my word salad, or I'll have a particular image that I want to take for a walk, and then obviously, kind of like your work isn't divorced from yourself. So like, your beliefs, things that trouble you about the world, like all of those messages do filter themselves in. Like even if like, I don't consciously try to be, I suppose, didactic or in any way. I'm just kind of trying to piece the world together for myself in little stories.
And can I ask, so you brought up your mum, and I really wanted to ask you about kind of writing as your mother. So I mean, I've read you say that in needlework you kind of sought to inhabit her a bit and kind of write about some of her experiences. And I mean, you wrote in the first person in that instance. And I was really interested in what that was like to kind of embody aspects of your mom and her lived experience, and what it was like to bring that work to her.
Yeah, I suppose it was more so than her lived experience. What I explored with Steph was kind of my mom's personality.
Yeah.
Because I'm not, I'm quite a lazy, gentle person. I like life. There it is. It kind of ambles on by, and I'll be like sitting down knitting a straight line on the sofa, But my mum is a fighter,
Yeah.
And she's very, very strong-willed, and she's got a huge amount of tenacity to her. And I wanted to, I suppose in a way, like Says, is kind of a fusion of both of us, because like how she feels about tattooing is kind of quite similar to how I feel about writing, and like what it does for her is what writing does for me. But like her kind of strength of will and her ability to keep everything going and her resilience is very much how I see my mother.
Yeah. And what did your mum make of the kind of, I mean, half her, half you Seth?
Yeah, she liked it. There was we actually had a conversation recently where when I was writing needlework, I don't normally write nonfiction. But I wrote a nonfiction piece about my mum. And it was a piece kind of about her scars and like her kind of like what I was talking about, kind of that she couldn't put on makeup and stuff. And it never sat right with me, Sophie, that I had done that. And it also didn't sit right with me that I had done that to coincide with my book coming out.
Okay.
Okay. And we recently had a conversation about that, where I kind of said it to her and I apologized to her, like she'd never asked me to.
Yeah.
But she actually needed that apology because it had bothered her, and she never said a word.
That's really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I do think sometimes, the kind of state of being a mother is being generous to your own, to your own detriment, really, in a way. But it's a very beautiful gesture, I think, to kind of give herself to you in some respect.
It was healing, and I was very glad we had that conversation, and that we both felt the same way about it, even though it had taken me time to come around. But like I think that, and like kind of being a mum now, you kind of think like a baby comes into the world and your body is theirs.
Yeah.
And I suppose that entitlement, that kind of tethering, it lasts well into adulthood in some ways,
Yeah, I would definitely feel it lasts very much between women and their mothers. And I don't know why that is, but I just do feel it. I sense that men are kind of sort of like eventually amputated. And I just don't know if women, I feel like the umbilical tug, even now, and my mum's on holidays in France, and I'm like, she knows I'm doing something, she's not happy with me, or, you know, I actually loved, I think you wrote so beautifully around this exact thing in the story, The Mother, where you're kind of describing the daughter who's 3 coming into the mother's bed at night. And kind of, I suppose, like there is that kind of, the father is very othered within the family. The family is really her and her daughter. And, you know, it's quite interesting. It really reminded me of kind of early weeks and months of motherhood when, you know, as you say, you are the baby's home, and it's like a really intense, like obsessive first infatuation, crush kind of love affair between a mother and a baby.
And it's visceral. Like I broke 3 teeth in labor.
Oh my God, tell me everything.
So yeah, and I have to go into the dental hospital for emergency kind of tooth fixing. Now,
Tooth fixing. And did you like bite the teeth out of your own mouth with the physicality of it?
No, I had seizures.
Oh my God.
And knocked them out on the bathroom floor. So I was kind of, because of COVID, I was kind of sucking it up a lot, and I was like, I'm going to labor at home for as long as possible because I want my husband to be with me. And so I did, and that's what happened.
Wow.
So, but anyway,
terrifying.
My medical information aside, I went into the dental hospital. I think it was day 3 on the way home.
Yeah.
And the woman was like, "Why are you here?" And I just burst into gut-wrenching sobs because my daughter wasn't beside me.
Yeah.
And it was the most animal thing, and I had no control over it.
Yeah.
It's primal.
Oh, it is. That first sense of them not being right beside you is so weird. It feels like you've been scooped out.
Yes.
And like the actual, like, you know, just frenzy to get them back is really wild. It's quite, I remember experiencing it as kind of an almost like real, like instant, like kind of lesson of like, oh, we never get away from our children. This is exquisite, but a life sentence.
Yeah.
I thought actually that kind of around this kind of like very nebulous, destabilizing anxiety of motherhood was amazingly illustrated, like in this imaginary friend scenario. Like, so I loved this story, The Mother, that we're discussing is like a real, I think real proper kind of, you know, Children of the Corn kind of, The Grudge kind of horror moment in the book. And the denouement is so good and so like toe curlingly creepy. So I won't go into it, but it did really, the whole thing worked so well to kind of communicate the sort of like, I think just the anxiety of motherhood, new motherhood, and that sense of like, you are now in a foreign country with becoming a parent. And yeah, tell me a little bit about that. Did you feel that in the work that you were kind of trying to describe?
Yeah, I wrote it before I was even pregnant. Like that's one of the older ones in it. But I did, yeah, it always, because it's like, I suppose like I had a conversation at one stage with a friend of mine who doesn't want kids, and she kind of said to me, if I could be a dad, I would have kids tomorrow. Do you know? But it's that thing of like, you're in a foreign country, but you're also the president of the country. You don't know how to do you know?
That, I mean, that isn't even a problem anymore, really, for most people in power. Oh, that is so fascinating. Oh, I'd be a parent if I could be a dad. That's brilliant. And I mean, no diss to dads at all, but it is true that like, on both sides, like they don't have the social expectations and they don't have the actual physiological upheaval that means you are tethered. And that is really amazing. I think that you wrote that, you know, having no first person experience yet or whatever, you know, because it really was, I just thought it was stunningly rendered. It was, you know, amazing. Tell me a little bit about the kind of humor in these stories. I really love, for example, those kind of moments where your like kind of absurdist thread like butts up against the total kind of humdrum of Irish life. I'm thinking very particularly about the couple on the Late Late Show who are describing their very unusual new family. So I don't know how much do we say about the stories without saying too much?
See, I am a very like, I will seek spoilers. That kind of person. Like, if it's my antidote for a horror movie that's scaring me too much as well, I'll pause it, go on Wikipedia, find out what happens, and then I'll be able to watch it again.
That's amazing. Just kind of short circuit. Okay, well, tell me a little bit about the opening story then that we're discussing here. So with the couple.
It actually came from kind of like just something glib I used to say when people, you know, because people do ask you about kids and like, oh, this, yeah, you know.
Are you a woman existing in the world?
You know what you should do. But thanks, friend. But I used to say kind of like, if I could give birth to a puppy, I'd do it tomorrow. You know, it's a whole human. You know? And then I kind of thought about like it would be, you know, because there is so much that goes into pregnancy for people, like whether it's straightforward or but particularly when it isn't. You know, kind of, and there's, you know, kind of, if you didn't feel that sense of like that visceral sense of being in a body, you know, before, like you absolutely will during, you know, and kind of I was thinking about all of that. And then I just decided to see how far I could go with it. But I felt like if I was going to build a world where women could have the option of like having, you know, being kind of artificially implanted with an animal of their choosing, you know, I kind of had to make it realistic. So, you know, they like, you had to put the sloth in the buggy, you know, and you kind of had to have like
go on.
You know, and it kind of, you had to have like Ryan Tubridy asking the questions that he would ask, you know, to the couple who had the panda. And, you know, and like
I love the moment when they have to give the round of applause to all of the mammies in Ireland. I was just absolutely dying laughing. But yeah, go on. It is the intersection, absolutely, of those worlds. It's so good.
And how there would be like, you know, kind of, because there's so much stuff with milestones, but there would be a level of smuggery in terms of species, you know, like, oh yeah, we just, you know, we felt we had to go with something endangered, you know, that's just who we are as a couple, you know, that kind of.
Yeah, the crunchy kind of animal insemination couple. And I was fascinated as well the way you kind of thought all the way through to like when their panda has to leave home and what happens to the pandas leaving home and how they go to the zoo, and it was really, I just really enjoyed it. It was just, it kind of was very like, you know, the way Black Mirror has those kind of like slightly less relentless episodes that are kind of funner, and just it really reminded me of one of those episodes. Like,
thank you.
Just that perfect, you know, real
that
world.
Is exactly the vibe I was going for.
Oh, excellent. I suppose on that, like, I think like your writing reminds me so much of, actually this collection reminded me so much of a collection by Roald Dahl, one of his collections for adult readers of short stories, the one with the renter and the bees. Oh God, did that narrow it down for you? I'm sorry.
Yeah, with Roald Dahl, I'm stuck on the Brain in the Jar.
Oh, I don't know the Brain in the Jar.
Oh, there's like the husband is a genius, and after he dies, there's a brain in the jar, and he has like two little eyes that like follow his wife around the room. He's quite controlling, and all of a sudden she's like turned the tables, and it gets really sinister, and he's just like this little brain and these two vulnerable little eyes.
Just this little uncased little jellyish brain. Don't hurt me. Well, it really did remind me of a lot of that kind of Roald Dahl, kind of like, yeah, the kind of, I suppose, like that, the kind of like subtle cruelties, you know, that can sort of spring up between couples. And it reminded me, I think as well, like there is such lushness in your writing. It always reminded me of Nights at the Circus, Angela Carter kind of vibes. And I'm always so interested to hear what writers love to read and watch. Like what kind of do you kind of love to kind of immerse yourself in when you're thinking about your stories and your ideas?
Loads of different stuff. Like I read everything. I love like and I go through phases. Like I'm very much on a like non-fiction / memoir binge at the moment. So I've reread a couple of essays in this excellent book recently.
Thank you.
And kind of reading I got really into this podcast kind of during the like late nights of like being a new mum, called Celebrity Book Club. So I've been reading like celebrity
I'm obsessed with celebrity memoir book clubs. Okay, I adore them, but go on, tell me.
Yeah, is it that because there's two?
Okay,
there's two celebrity
I'm with Claire and Ashley.
I'm with Chelsea Devontes.
Okay, I now have a new book club to join. Okay, tell us. So what does she do?
She kind of takes a celebrity memoir and she does this thing called the Bookdale test on it. You know, kind of, did she speak her truth? Did it change my life? You know, kind of, was she vulnerable? And like goes through it all. And it's kind of analyzing, you know, kind of Jessica Simpson or T-Boz from TLC or kind of Gabrielle Union, like through a kind of a compassionate feminist lens, but it's like comedians. So it's like really warm and funny, but like, oh, and she's always like, this is going to sound really like glib the way I'm going to phrase it, but like I mean this in a very sincere and sensitive way. She's always on about her trauma and it's lovely. You know?
Yeah. I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I'm pro it, very much
exactly.
so.
It's so funny.
And do you find when you're writing, like, did you feel an increased sort of sense of vulnerability about bringing I Want to Know That I'll Be Okay out compared with previous work?
Yes. For some very concrete reasons. The Bockety Woman is based on a real person. So there's kind of little aspects like that where you've taken something that's very true about your family and you've wrapped it in all these lies and sent it off to a literary journal where no one related to you will read it.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden there it is on a shelf, you know? So I suppose I was a little bit nervous about that aspect of it. And also in terms of like, I write in the first person a lot. When you are a woman writing in the first person, people assume that what you are writing is reflective of your own experience. And people also have no qualms about asking you if it is. So I did realize that there's a huge amount of like explorations of difficult motherhood and all of that stuff. So I was a little bit nervous about, I suppose, what people would read into it as well.
Yes, no, that makes sense. And it is a really tiresome thing that, you know, women writers need to kind of almost get said up top of loads of interviews.
Yeah.
These are made up. It's fiction, just fiction. Yeah, it's a kind of, I think no matter what, bringing a piece of art out into the world is a very radioactive kind of moment.
Yeah.
Or is it? I mean, 9 books in, do you feel it's gotten easier?
I think it depends on the book. And there are definitely books that I have felt much more tied to and much more nervous about. Particularly, like, say, kind of, for example, like Savage Her Reply, writing that was a really, really intense experience. So I was kind of humming before it came into the world. Whereas with Precious Catastrophe, I feel like I did all the stressing during the 7 years and 18 drafts that I wrote the first book, because I wanted to tell a full story. So I had thought through a lot of the stuff that would happen in book 2 while I was tweaking away at book 1. So it kind of just flowed and it was lovely. And I'm kind of like, I really hope people like it. And I am quite nervous about it coming into the world, but I'm not like twanging like a guitar string about it or anything. Do you know, if that makes sense?
Yeah, no, I think you sound incredibly healthy. Well done. It is interesting though when you've got that kind of like the sequel anxiety, because there is obviously such huge fans of the first book, all kind of. But I think that people, when you love a book, you're so happy to re-enter the world, like so happy to re-enter the world of Madeline, and so in a way, it's like just coming home for a reader,
Yeah, I hope I hope they like it, because like it's a little bit different in that it's dual voice, so it's kind of half Madeline, half Catelyn, and the villain in it is, I don't want to say too much, but I kind of like, I'm surprised I got away with it. You know, I'm interested to see what people will think, but I don't think anyone is like going to get as mad at me as they did about the kitten, so it'll be fine.
And what can I ask, why Savage Her Reply was such an intense writing experience?
I think because I connected so deeply with mythology through the research, because initially I started,
it's really deeply researched.
Yeah, I started writing it thinking it would be a novella, and then I quickly realized I had to stop and read for a year. So I had, I mean, obviously I was working and like doing things as well. I wasn't just like sitting down in my friend's villa in Tuscany reading.
No, I think we're all grasping that you do a lot. It is so impressive and inspiring to actually see how much you do, and also to hear you say I needed to stop and read for a year is like really cool, because there is so much pressure on productivity that I feel people could feel just pressured to power on. So it's you being really honoring the work.
No, and it needed it. And I kind of like, I read for the year, annotated everything. Like I could have read for long, like I could still be reading for that book. Like it was like and I really loved, and I really connected with some of the stuff. Like there was one book by Mary Louise something, von Schuddeit, like it's a Norwegian name,
right?
But she was talking about like the oral history, the oral culture of Irish storytelling, and how like uniquely Irish people tell stories. And she was kind of saying about, because they developed from, kind of like fireside tales and all this, that there'll often be, they'll have a strong beginning, it'll have loads of exciting bits, and then it'll kind of just wander off towards the end. And I was like, oh my God, I feel attacked, because I do have difficulty with ending books. But or like there was one description of kind of were there female druids, and it's kind of, well, no, druids were largely male, but there is one kind of description of a gang of wild-haired women clad in black off to the side.
Ooh, to the side.
Yeah, and it's like in a Scottish text, and it's like I was just like, oh, my people.
I know. I was like, it's me and my friends in detention in 1998.
But it just like, there were all these different parts where I felt really connected to the stories that were told, and like really interested in excavating them and inhabiting them. And I was kind of nearly sorry to let it go, but I was trying and trying and trying to start writing it and find the right beginning, because I knew the journey Aoife would take, because obviously it's the journey in the book. But I couldn't get an into her.
Yeah.
No. And then one day, like, the opening literally poured out of me. I think about 2 words have changed throughout the edits and everything. I like wrote this huge swathe of, like, you know, kind of, I am older than, I am older than, like, it's very repetitive, the beginning.
Yeah, it's kind of incantation-y.
Yeah. And then I just burst into tears.
Wow.
And I've never had that with a book before. Like, I think every book is different, but whatever it was with Savage, like, I wrote it with the meat of me. So like, when that book was in the world, I was very, very anxious, that, I suppose as well, because she is a villainous character, like, I wanted her to be met with compassion, you know?
Yeah. That's really amazing. Like, that something was clearly unlocked. Something had been building.
It was weird, Sophie.
Yeah. It's like you were packing yourself with all of the kind of the knowledge and things to kind of, ooh. It's like, I feel like that's very you, actually. Just, it fits with my image of you, of how you bring these books into being, you know?
Bang it out, have a cry.
Yeah. Well, actually, just a sort of a wonderful, deep level of caring, you know, and care and giving a shit, you know. And do you see another kind of collection of short stories, or are you kind of like, are you kind of into a new project already?
Yeah, I'm under contract for a book, so I'm kind of doing a bit of research around that at the moment. And it's very, like, it's very engrossing, and I'm really engrossed in it. But I do have there's a couple of things recently, like just little images and stuff, that I've kind of put away in another little folder on my laptop, kind of to come back to when I do get blocked, or when I do need a little bit of an escape from whatever I'm writing, you know. Because I think, like, that is, like, it is a wonderful function of short fiction, that you can, like, I mean, and sometimes it can take as long as a book almost to get it right. Like, you're not doing it every day, but you are revisiting it over a period of, you know, kind of months or years. But it's satisfying.
Yeah. It's very inspiring, I think, to kind of hear about your process. And but it seems amazing. Like, it does seem, do you get a sense that you don't have enough time in all the world to kind of get it all out? Like, do you feel like you're trying to scramble after all of your work and your ideas to get them out?
A lot of the time. And there's an awful lot I want to do, and an awful lot I'm excited by. I suppose I'm really grateful this year to, like, I got an Arts Council bursary, and that's how I can take a career break and dedicate more time to my writing. And I'm really, really grateful for that space and for that faith in my work. Like, it means a lot. And it also, I suppose, allows me to take a step I wouldn't otherwise have been able to take, and to write full time, you know, and that's amazing.
Yeah. Oh my God. Like, given what you have accomplished, I'm excited to see what comes next with all of this space for you. Thank you so much for having this chat.
Oh, it's been so lovely to talk to you. Like, Sophie, you had the hardest job, and you were just such a joy to talk to.
It's been so fab to speak to you, and it's been so fab to just get really actually immersed in your work. And I just adore, I Want to Know That I'll Be Okay. And I can't wait to see what you write next. And I can't wait to get my hands on Precious Catastrophe, because I'm a big, huge fan of Perfectly Preventable Deaths.